Hi, David. I am Mr. Earth Guy Saad. We've known each other for a while now. We used
Yeah,
to
I saw it.
work together.
We did.
And since you left, well, formerly CGG, I've been seeing a lot of interesting things on my LinkedIn feed based around what you're doing. And I thought, what better way to start off my sort of podcasting journey than to speak to somebody who's doing some really interesting things. And yeah, you were the first person that came to mind. So welcome, David. What I'd like you to do is to introduce yourself to the audience. I've got followers that come from all age ranges and different backgrounds, and they're always interested in learning and hearing stories from people that are scientists or come from backgrounds of science, but have also moved into that kind of business and startup entrepreneurial sort of landscape. So if you would be so kind, it'd be great. I'll be grateful if you could just introduce yourself and who you are, where you've come from, and yeah, a bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, kind of you to invite me on to your podcast, Sard. It's great to be here, and yeah, great to be talking with you. So my name's David Gold. I am the CEO, although I don't particularly like the term CEO. It sounds a bit too big and corporate for what we do. But yeah, I'm effectively the CEO of Ecodetect, and we essentially create AI powered wildlife detection systems, mainly for offshore renewables, and we really focus in on what I like to call emerging technologies in the offshore renewables sphere. So things like tidal energy and floating offshore wind. But my background really is in geology and paleontology. I started life as a paleontologist, and then I did a PhD looking at climate change and the response of sort of coral reefs and microorganisms to climate change about 20 million years ago in Southeast Asia, and spent a lot of time in Indonesia, and in particular West Papua, which was a great experience to go and do field work out there for 6 months, and then several trips back there afterwards. And then I got a job at a geoscience consultancy. Started off doing technical geological, paleontological work, looking at thin sections of rocks down the microscope, and helping our clients essentially understand the age and the depositional environments of these rocks. But as I sort of progressed through my career, really, I found a love for sort of talking to clients and understanding people's challenges, and how we could build projects around solving those challenges. And as that sort of career progressed, it moved beyond just sort of looking at geological projects and challenges into how do we solve more pressing present day concerns like climate change, and how do we shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and what processes can we put in place to ease that journey.
So do you think you're obviously you have roots in sort of paleontology and sort of, I guess, ancient life in that aspect? Do you reckon
Hmm.
that's one of the drivers that led you towards this conservation-y kind of mindset of trying to look after, and like obviously you're kind of working the transitional side things now. You're trying to figure out ways to make current technologies better for the environment, right? And looking after
Yeah,
the
that's right.
environment. So do you reckon your love for, 'cause obviously it's a niche you've picked because obviously it's a growing niche for sure. We need to make sure that we're sustainably looking after our animals and marine life. But do you reckon that, like, what is it that why did you choose that side of the transitional journey? Like,
Yeah, I say to myself now that the current work that I do is sort of present day marine biology, and I say
yeah,
that I've always been a marine biologist. Even when I was a paleontologist, I was just looking at marine organisms from millions of years ago. And
yeah,
when I was studying paleontology, I did that down at the University of Portsmouth. And we did a lot of comparative anatomy, looking at different organisms, sketching sketching their skeletons and things like that.
Sure.
And I always thought, if I wasn't a paleontologist, I'd probably make a pretty good vet, and that would be a profession that I could go into. But generally, I enjoyed paleontology and geology for a love of the earth, and
Hmm.
understanding how it works and how all its sort of ecosystems are interconnected. And I always had this feeling that working within the geoscience business, perhaps that's not the right way to kind of go and protect the earth so much. I
Sure.
don't know whether that's a controversial opinion or not.
It's a truth, isn't it? It's a hard truth, which is
Yeah, and I was kind of wrestled with that a little bit with my conscience,
mm,
and in the company that I worked for, I pushed quite hard into how else could we use our geoscience skills for other applications, and we ended up doing some work looking at scanning electron microscope techniques for identifying microplastics, and started to look into this renewables space
sure.
as well. So I always thought that there are transferable skills from the geoscience industry into more renewable energies, and directly linked sort of subsurface expertise for carbon capture and storage, and also geothermal, but also the data science skills, and the other sort of technical skills needed for again facilitating and monitoring renewable energy, traditional renewable energy like offshore wind,
Mm.
and some of these new technologies that are coming on stream now.
So would you say then that it wasn't necessarily a specific project or a specific thing that triggered that sort of, yeah, you know what, this is what I need to do. I'm done with this past life and I need to move on. It's less of an event that's triggered that. It's just been an underlying thing that you've had almost throughout your life of,
Yeah,
from
I think it's a mixture of things that happen. Life is a journey, and it's
sure.
complicated, and
Yeah,
things happen. And I always had that interest in wildlife and nature conservation, and Earth and the planet. And there's these pressing issues of climate change, and
of course.
biodiversity crisis, and how do we address that, and can we address that with technology?
Hmm.
And there was a series of events. Really, I was attending some conferences, and I was hearing from people in the tidal energy sector saying that um, they have a legal obligation essentially to record underwater data, video data, sonar data, and they end up with terabytes, petabytes worth of data, and most of it is useless, really.
Mm,
They use motion triggered cameras, and often it's bits of seaweed and plastic bags and marine litter that are floating by, and they really need to identify things like whales and dolphins, and seals. And they had far too much data than they knew what to do with. And they said,
right.
if only there was a tool out there that could essentially filter all that data for us and just pick out the bits that we need.
Mm,
And I thought, that's interesting, and feasible, and that's something that we could potentially do. And I kept hearing that message repeatedly from people from different companies, and there seemed to be a real sort of gap in the market there, that we could sort of develop a business around. So that's what we went and did. But also at a similar time, my wife became pregnant, and we welcomed in our newborn beautiful baby boy.
yeah.
And it just seemed like a good moment to kind of go all in, really, on developing this new business. I
See,
could be
see,
my own boss.
some would say it was the worst time to do it as well.
Yeah,
So
I've heard
it's
that as well.
the
People say I've got.
risk, all the reward, I suppose, though, right?
Yeah, I joke with people and say I have a newborn baby and also a newborn business as well at the same time. But it gave me that flexibility to be my own boss, and be able to attend various hospital appointments that you need, when you're having a baby, and it allows me to almost take an extended paternity leave, really. And if I want to go and take
Mm,
take go out for a walk with my wife and baby, then
you
then I
you
can,
can.
and then catch up on the work later. So the flexibility of being your own boss, I guess, is really great. And also I had the feeling that we're we inherited this earth from previous generations, and my son will inherit it from us, and
Sure, of
hopefully
course.
we can leave it in a better state for him than when we received it. So there was a sort
Well,
of
a
a series
multitude of
of
factors.
yeah, a
There's a
series of
multitude.
events that sort
Yeah.
of culminated together to help sort of lead me to the decision to perhaps leave a fairly comfortable, well-paying job in a stable, or some arguably stable
Cyclical,
sector in
cyclical.
geoscience, and take a risk on starting my
Yeah,
own business. But so far it's been nothing but really positive,
that's
and
amazing to
we're moving
hear.
in the right direction, and we're gaining a lot of interest, and maybe it can be a family business one day. Who knows?
Who knows? Well, before we sort of touch on the actual business itself, which is Ecodetect, I'm interested because there are a lot of people these days who are in a similar situation to you, where either one they have a comfortable job, but they don't like their job, right? They do it because they've got to pay the bills. We're living in a world now where the economies are hard to live in, right? There's a lot of crises happening around the world, and money is a big topic, and little small families, young families, the housing ladder. There are loads of these sort of problems that are sort of in the industry. Well, not the industry, but the economy. So the idea of leaving something stable and then moving into something which is more risky, like starting a startup, which is a big deal. How does I know you've mentioned that obviously having a family and your the ethics and morals around why you want to do this, that's obviously really important. But how does one start? I mean, let's walk through like an idea. Like obviously you started Ecodetect and you said, you know what, I'm going to leave my current role and I'm going to move on to something else. What do those steps look like for somebody who who was in your position, right? Like, was it did you have to have a lot of your own savings stood up? Did you start branching out into networks? How does that process look for someone that might want to also follow your lead, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it starts really with wanting to kind of make a change, really, or deliver some change. I think we're all creatures of habit, and it
Mm,
can it can get quite comfortable being in a job where you have the sort of the safety net of all people, support networks and things like that. But are you really sort of making change in that organization? And if you think about some of your own internal moral compass, and wanting to change the world for the better, and leave an environmental or a social impact, then are you doing that in your current role? And I think if the answer is no, and that's something that you want to do, then I think it's time to make that change and do something where you can leave that impact. And there's no good time to do this, right? You can kind of wait for a right time to do something, and that will never arrive. And we've said just before, I started this business and also found out that my wife is pregnant. Was that a good time to start a business or not? I think the jury is still out on on that one. But
sure.
but so far so good, really. But I think you really got to back yourself,
Mm,
and you've got to take an element of risk to back yourself. And what we did with Ecodetect is that we initially started with some savings to generally sort of keep the business going, and get our messaging out there, but also we took on some loans, so, some debt financing from companies like the British Business Bank that support growing businesses, or early startup businesses. And I was a bit hesitant to do that at the
of
start,
course.
but I was getting lots of support from various groups like Innovate UK and Business Wales, where I'm based up in North Wales, and they kept saying, you've got to back yourself. Why would anyone else back you if you can't
If
back
you
yourself,
can't back,
really? and
sure.
and so you need to put that element of, you need to take that risk initially, and hope that then becomes rewarded. And we're now going through an investment journey, and I'm pleased to tell you that we're very close to closing our pre-seed investment round.
Amazing.
And that has in part come from the confidence that they have in our business, comes in part from taking that risk early on and saying that we've got a really solid idea here. There's real
Yes.
market demand for this. I've backed it. I'm willing to kind of put up capital and take that risk myself initially. And people then buy into that and buy into what you're what you're selling essentially.
Yeah.
And then we managed to secure some really great investors that also have an interest in this sort of marine ocean conservation space, and they can open doors for us as well.
Perfect.
So yeah, I think my message would be take all the support that you can out there. There's a lot of support. There's grants out there. There's free support that you can get from different
Mm.
groups, and yeah, just take a deep breath and take the plunge. I think is the best best way to do it. Is the only way to do it, I think.
Yeah. No, I was in I'm similar to your situation. I've in a similar boat where I'm currently working with a bunch of founders, kind of in the same process that you
Yeah,
went through, where we've managed to get some funding and pre-funding, and we're putting together like a new online tutoring sort of platform. But a lot of what you just said resonated, where there's also a lot of value in reaching out to family and friends. That's one thing that we noticed a lot was investors don't always have to be these white collar suits and boots. They can often be people that who believe in you and your idea. But the most important thing is you have to believe in, like, you can't just have the idea and let someone else necessarily fund it, unless it's a radically insane idea, which is
yeah,
like
you've got some
so
unicorn
groundbreaking.
idea, some
100%. Yeah.
great money making app or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not easily done with the work that we do, but yeah, we've lent on angel investors initially, and again we've used local networks, people from the local area that can kind of see locally what the renewable energy market is like in North Wales. There's loads of offshore wind. A couple of companies have recently been awarded extensions to their wind farms, so there's going to be some huge infrastructure projects going on. There's some tidal energy projects and Celtic sea floating wind. So there's a lot going on locally, and people from the local area understand the opportunity here. But then there's also the global market export potential for what we do as well. So we've got a lot of investors
Mm.
or that understand that, and can kind of see the wider picture and perhaps the long term plan for the business. And
Yes.
in certain respects, we have to follow various industry milestones. We have to wait for companies to get their planning permissions and all their permits and
Of course.
consent sorted before they actually put anything in the water, and that can take some time. So we're spending the time now sort of building those relationships, demonstrating what we can do with the technology, and then hopefully in a year's time, that's when we expect sort of the really big contracts and things to come through. Fingers crossed.
That's
Anyway,
well, yeah, fingers crossed. Well, and we can obviously get on to what exactly that looks like, right? So you're the CEO, founder, and sort of you run Ecodetect, which, as you've mentioned, is sort of using emerging sort of AI technologies, mixing that with the more, let's say, traditional means of just recording capture with devices, and imagine
Yep.
sound and vision. And it's how do you see through the murky water to make sure what you're actually picking up and tracking, let's say, are things of value, which I suppose is what your business is basically around. Is
Yep,
that
that's
is
right.
that a fair assumption? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. So I mean, we're focusing really on wildlife,
Hmm.
and our USP really is imaging data. Traditionally, a lot of sort of wildlife surveys have relied on things like passive acoustic monitoring, which is really great for picking up vocalizing animals like
Sure.
whales and dolphins, but
Whales.
but
Yeah.
but it misses other things like birds and seals and stuff like that. Um, which is where sort of imaging data can come in, but then that also has a constraint around water clarity and visibility, and how much
Yes.
can you see into the water. So we use a combination of different sensor types just to kind of fill the gaps. Really, if one sensor type is not picking up something, then another sensor type will pick up the slack essentially. And we integrate all those systems together, and like you say, there's a bit of old school hardware and nuts and bolts, putting things together and putting things in the water and making sure they're waterproof and they don't get swept
Yes.
away in the current. And then there's also advanced data processing using AI to detect the species, and then also issuing alerts to various key species of interest, which interestingly is different in different places, not only around the world but even in the UK. So in Scotland, they're really concerned about detecting harbour seal, which with the population is in decline there. But here in Wales, it's more around sort of dolphins and porpoises. And in Canada, interestingly, they're more concerned with fish, and we don't tend to worry about that in the UK. But
Sure.
Canadian economy is so reliant on sort of fishing, then that's their sort of key species of interest. So we have to adapt and tailor our offerings for different geographies, around the world, not only just within
Yeah.
the different nations of the UK.
So, um, for let's say the people outside of the industry now that you sort of have planted yourself in, what what actually happens when like a wind turbine or a tidal device is obviously it's installed. Obviously, you mentioned that all the permits have to go through, and that I imagine the same way, like in let's say the hydrocarbon industry, there's this sort of like leading period to a rig actually going out or a rig being put up. There's a lot of work that goes into it. At what point are you involved in that process? Is it towards the end, once these devices are sort of not, let's say devices, but once the turbines and the tidal devices, once they're sort of ready to go out, that's where then you get involved? Or are you actually earlier in the planning process to sort of figure out where these devices should be placed in the, let's say, the permit or the region that these companies are working in?
Yeah, I mean, we can get on, we can get involved really early in that sort of development journey. We don't really advise on where is the best place for people to put the turbines, for instance. They do a lot of in-house sort of resource assessment is to kind of identify those locations. But what we can do is, when they're applying for their environmental sort of permits and getting their consents, marine regulators will want to know what technology they're going to use to monitor and then mitigate against any potential negative impacts with wildlife. So at that stage, we can come in and we can say, this is the technology that we'll use. These are the data deliverables that we can provide. This is the reporting period. We can provide real-time alerts. So if a dolphin does come into close proximity to one of your devices, we can send an alert in as near real time as we can get it. And then you can put in a mitigation step to perhaps, for instance, switch off a rotating blade for an underwater turbine, or emit an acoustic deterrent to hopefully move a dolphin away from a
Harm's way.
really harmful area.
Yeah.
So they can incorporate that information into their environmental monitoring and mitigation plans, and hopefully then that gives the regulators confidence that they have a pretty robust plan of how they're going to monitor this thing, and that should expedite their consents and permitting process. And then once they achieve that, there's often a sort of test and demonstration phase, and a lot of the floating offshore wind projects that are about to happen in the Celtic Sea are at that phase now, where they're going to put in some either full scale or scale deployments of bits of infrastructure with various monitoring equipment attached to it, just to demonstrate that we can achieve what we say we can achieve. So we're getting involved at that stage as well, and then potentially, later on down the line, they'll move out to commercial deployment and large scale arrays of hundreds of turbines, for instance, and we would get involved then and install our equipment onto those arrays and essentially monitor 24/7 wildlife in real time.
No, that's amazing. I said because I feel like it's I think you've jumped on the opportunity at the right time. I feel like especially with the emergence of AI and sort of being able to, as you mentioned, right, recognizing the there's one thing just to recognize movement, and there's another thing to recognize movement and then try and figure out the species, what animal it is that's coming nearby. How far can you guys go? Like let's just say the perfect conditions. It's beautiful water, right? We haven't got like, I don't know, murky waters, or there's no storm fronts coming in messing everything up. Let's say we're working with decent clarity. How far can Ecodetect go in determining what it is that it's seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of work up in Scotland, in sort of Shetland and Orkney, and the water quality there. The clarity is really good, and you can see tens of meters in all directions around you. And we've got some really great footage of dolphins, seals, birds, and things like that. When it's a bit murkier, we tend to use something called active sonar or imaging sonar, and that extends the range of what we can detect, really up to sort of hundreds of meters. If we use passive acoustic monitoring systems just for those sort of vocalizing animals, you can detect sort of kilometers away. But with the active sonar, for instance, you just tend to see a blob of something on the screen, and that's where we might use the optical cameras and the acoustic sonar just to kind of marry up the two images and see if we can identify what it is, what's in that blob from the image. But we also do a lot of behavioral analysis now as well. So
Okay.
regulators aren't just interested in what species it is, but how do they behave around these turbines, and can we distinguish between evasive versus avoidance behavior? Are they actively avoiding the turbines? They know they're there, and they consciously make a decision to move around the turbines, or do they sort of swim at them and then see them at the last minute and sort of make an evasive maneuver just to get around them? And we're starting then to use AI to recognize patterns of behavior and build
Mm.
up a better understanding of how these animals interact with the turbines. And then we can also bring in things like metocean data, weather data, and things like that to say, are there periods of activity at high or low tide, or dawn or dusk, or some other events that we can kind of correlate high peaks in activity around certain events, and that might then inform sort of the operational plans of the turbines. And they'll say, right, okay, we will turn the blades off at dawn and dusk because that's when these animals are most active, and then we'll just have them on during the day, and when the tidal flow is at a particular velocity or something like that.
I was gonna say, the more you dive into it, there's so much information you guys can capture. And I guess I'm quite intrigued, right? There are regulations that these companies now have to follow. And do you think for Ecodetect, are you trying to get on both sides of the equation, where you're wanting the businesses themselves to want to have your input because it's almost like a safeguarding for them, right? As a business, you want to make sure that you have no fallout, right? And this might be across. There are many industries that have the potential to do, let's say, harm to the
Mm.
environment, and it's all about mitigating that risk and reducing, or if not alleviating and stopping the risk altogether. Obviously, Ecodetect, you're helping at that front of essentially, if you're going to put something there, let us at least be by your side to ensure that you guys have all the information, all the data necessary to make good decisions to determine your workflows. But on the other side, you also have the regulators that I imagine you're also wanting to get on their side, where it's almost well, if you're working in this area, you're going to have to use these guys to ensure that you're following the rules, right? Because we want to make
Yes.
sure that, at the end of the day, shareholder value is very important to companies, and regulators, watchdogs and stuff, whatever. They want to make sure that the companies working in these more sensitive areas, right, are doing what they say they're doing. So are you trying to be on both sides there, like trying
Well,
to get
we're
or
inevitably
are you on both sides?
we're on both sides. I think we have to be very careful about delivering objective data, right?
Mm,
And generally we're pro renewable energy development. We think it's a good thing to move us away from fossil fuels. We need to generate sustainable energy. We need
yes.
that energy security and diversity within the energy mix. So generally, we want to provide tools that can help facilitate the deployment of renewable energy. But that's not to say that we will, turn a blind eye to any potential environmental risks, if there's any collision risks or anything like that. So, we will look at the data, and we'll objectively analyze it and deliver the results. And then it's up to the regulators to kind of decide what they do with that. So we will almost act like a middleman, really. So we will
Yeah,
take the data from the energy developer and then provide the results to the regulator, and say, look, this is what we've found. And thankfully we haven't found any real sort of negative impacts just yet. But we do see some close encounters of wildlife, and we do let people know. So yeah, I think we have to learn from mistakes of the past
of course.
just generating energy, or using the natural resources that we have without any sort of thought for the impact that's being made. You think of sort of Deepwater Horizon and sort of big
Yeah.
sort of
Unfortunately,
environmental disasters like that. We
yeah.
have to. We don't want to be in a situation like that where we say we need energy at any cost, and we'll deploy hundreds and hundreds of turbines, and that causes a negative impact on migrating birds or migrating marine life. We need to kind of find that balance, really, and make sure we get the energy that we need, but also that we're promoting it, and hopefully also delivering on biodiversity or marine net gain at the same time as well. So there's a net positive impact in what we're doing.
So with the um obviously, I imagine there's a fair bit of R&D that you guys have to do. I mean, there's last thing you want to do is put a device on a rig, for example, or a turbine, and it just floats away, right? Like, so how have you tackled that aspect of the business? Because obviously you're selling this idea. You're selling this idea to clients and potential clients, and you've got to almost prove that this thing works. So what was that stage like? Like the first time you managed to successfully put something on a device and capture something and do something with that data. What was that moment like?
I mean, that aspect of it is probably the most fun that we have. Is trying things, breaking things. We have a mantra of sort of fail fast, really, and break
Mm.
it. It's okay to break things. It's okay for things not to work, because that's how we learn to move forward. And yeah, there's a lot of sort of planning that goes into that. For the different technologies that we have different technology readiness levels, I would
Okay.
say. So we're at certain different stages for different technologies. So some of them are a bit more mature, and some of them we're right in the thick of putting this stuff in the water, testing it first. So in the spring, we've got an exciting project where we're going to deploy some test equipment to test some marine communications, which is going to be really exciting. And we're having those discussions now on how heavy does it need to be.
Mm.
How do we attach it to the seabed? How is it going to transmit data from A to B? What does that look like? And those discussions are really sort of exciting. Lots of ideas being thrown around, and at the end of the day, you don't know until you actually put something in the water, and you find out whether it works or not. So other bits of technology, we're already doing that. I mentioned to you earlier that I was just yesterday installing some underwater cameras and some communications equipment, and that was really exciting. We're getting some good data from that, and that's sort of a preliminary test to a wider project that's actually going to launch next month. So unfortunately, I can't talk too much about it now,
No,
but
no, that's
in the
fine.
next
That's
month or
fine.
so, you should see some
Yeah,
exciting
yeah,
data
yeah.
coming from that, and that's a really exciting project. So I think I'm always keen to test beforehand, and
Of course.
also provide sort of proof of concept studies to people, and say, look, we'll show you what we can do, and we'll build something with you that sort of meets your needs, because everybody has unique challenges, really, and there's not sort of one size fits all bit of technology out there, and you're going to have to tweak things a little bit to get the desired result that you need, and that's what I find sort of most exciting about what we're doing, and getting out there, getting on boats, throwing stuff overboard, and hopefully getting it back and getting the data back as well. So lots of learning on the
I
job,
was
but
gonna,
thankfully
I
we're
was gonna
building a
say if you
really strong team that can deliver that.
I was gonna say if you haven't already, you need to get on the social justice warrior train of TikTok and Instagram and start having someone with a camera just following you around on these little boats and putting things
Yeah, I
on
think
there because I
so.
think
Yeah, I think I'll have to
people really
employ
enjoy
a social
people
media
really
manager or
enjoy
something.
well, but no, people really enjoy kind of connecting with businesses that are trying to transform the world or help the world. I mean, especially in this day and age where there is so much going on. These are really positive stories that people want to follow because, like, listen, on the other hand, I wake up feeling sad every morning because the news tells me this or the news tells me that, and it's like, oh, but this is chap called David Gold, and he's got this company that's looking after whales and dolphins. That's a great thing to follow. Let's see what I want to see what he captures. It's
Yeah, what
a
what I like about what we do is because we use imaging data, we often get some really nice images of cute animals,
like
seals, dolphins.
yes,
We're looking
yes,
at some otters at the moment, which are quite charismatic and things, and hopefully we can share some of those videos
mm,
later on in the year and sort of build that engagement that way. So I think
yeah,
it's
definitely.
yeah, it's really nice for people to kind of follow and see that you see that impact that we're having with technology mixed with sort of the natural world.
Yeah, because it's one of those where you're obviously it's one of those really weird topics where you want to like it's also like EVs and batteries, right? There's this push to sort of push us away from fossil fuels, but going down the lithium route also has its issues, right? And it's almost like you're trying to do really good stuff, but at the same time, not you don't want it to happen, but there's often the other side to the coin, right? More electric cars means more lithium mines, and more lithium mine. There's that two side to the coin. I think the same can be said, obviously, with the offshore industry, which is the problem you're trying to tackle, right? You're trying to ensure that this push to transition, this push to renewables is done in the most friendly and harmless way possible. So I think that's why it is really important that companies like yours are profiled also in the social world where these questions probably will come up. Often at times the conversation around renewables is, oh, like why is my gas or my electricity bill still so expensive when wind farms are being put up, and
Mm.
apparently we had 23 days, again, don't quote me on this, but this many days of renewable energy last year in the UK. So okay, well, why weren't our bills going down? But that's usually the focus that people have, and I'm sure as more and more rigs, well, offshore devices and wind turbines, sorry, get installed, the last thing we want is a deep water horizon situation, right? Where a pool of, a pod of whales or dolphins or whatever, they collided into a wind farm, and next thing you know, the waters don't look very nice, right? That would be a story that very, very much, gets picked up by all sorts of news outlets. And we don't want that to happen. We want to protect this push for offshore, this push for renewables. So we need to mitigate that, which I guess is where you guys come in to stop that from happening.
Yeah, and I think yeah, there's a potential risk there. We're looking at floating offshore wind at the moment, and they talk
Mm,
about sort of primary and secondary entanglement risk, and you have bits of ghost fishing gear that are floating around, big fishing nets, and if they get tangled around these tethers, then what happens if a pod of dolphins or whales sort of swim into that and
mm.
get caught up in it? And I think there's a real push. We see people's opinions changing geopolitically as to whether renewables are worth the investment or not. But I think generally there's a shift in the general public's perception, and there's almost like a social license really for any new developments. And even if there's not a geopolitical sort of mandate to say you need to do things sustainably, I think sort of the new generations that are coming through are a lot more environmentally conscious, and they'll put that sort of consumer pressure on making sure that these things are delivered safely. So I I think there will always be an appetite for what we do, and I think generally
Mm,
as the younger generation start to trickle their way upwards into positions of power, we will see some of those views changing over the next sort of few decades. Probably it will take, but. Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I went to I went to a conference a long time ago in the EU in Brussels, and there was a guy talking, and he was talking about energy sufficiency. We talk a lot about sort of sustainability and
mm,
things, but
yeah.
less about sufficiency. And he had a good analogy where he was talking to some European city region council or something like that, and they said, "Oh, we've managed to reduce traffic in the city centre by X amount, reducing sort of fossil fuels and things by replacing it with electric e-scooters or electric bicycles." And the guy turned around and said, "Well, what's wrong with just normal bicycles and pedal power rather than
Yeah.
replacing these things with electric powered vehicles, which are great for reducing emissions at the site of from exhausts and things, but still draw on a huge amount of power for charging that. So we need to start thinking about energy sufficiency within our communities really as well, and all of us need to be a little bit more conscious
Yes, agreed with that.
of how we use that, and as a business that uses AI, we're very conscious of the ethical use of AI and the amount of sort of
That's
power
what I was.
consumption
That was my
needed
follow-up
for.
question. Was going. Yeah, my follow-up
Yeah,
question was
so I
going to
mean,
be
it's
related. Yeah.
you know we live in a world where we're getting more and more environmentally conscious, but having increasing demands on the amount of energy that we consume. So, how do we balance that out? And there's no real good answer for that at this stage. Developing more renewables might be a way to do that, or finding more efficient ways
Mm.
of kind of cooling these big energy data centers. So,
Well,
as
I
a
think
company,
there.
we use sort of cloud platforms that have their servers in Finland, for instance. So it's all naturally cooled. So we do monitor our sort of supply chain and our energy usage and things. So we're very conscious that we're not contributing to that problem that we're trying to sort of solve as a business as well. So it's tricky. It's an interesting situation. You see how people like OpenAI and Anthropic
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
other sort of
the
large
absolute
AI
power,
companies
the
are.
powerhouses, but
Yeah, yeah.
there are big concerns for sure around what that looks like. But again, that was going to be my follow up, and you sort of already answered it in terms of like how do you trace your trail, your carbon footprint, if you will, or your energy footprint. I suppose
Yeah, there's the
is the
carbon
more
footprint, and also we're keen on sort of attributing where we train our models. There's a lot of
yes.
generative AI out there that takes people's copyrighted
Hmm.
materials
Hmm.
and then sort of commercializes it. And we're keen that we don't do that. It would be very easy for us to do a Google search for a particular species of dolphin and just scrape all those images and build a species identification model around that. But we don't own any of that data, and
Yeah,
it's copyright protected. So we are keen to collect that data ourselves, or approach underwater photographers, marine biologists for their data, and get permissions to use that, and that's what we use to then
that's great.
train all our models. So we're keen on sort of the ethical use of AI, and making sure that we reduce our power consumption as much as possible as well. And hopefully that's some small part to
Yes,
kind of
yes.
contribute or even offset against sort of the wider use of these sort of power hungry AI models.
It's a I think if you had told me 10 years ago, or not even 10, yeah, maybe 10 years ago, about what AI would be today, I probably wouldn't have believed that anybody that told me it's moved on that quick. I think because it's propelled so quickly, it accelerated so quickly, um these questions are now catching up, but it's so embedded in our lives now where it's one of those, well, but I kind of like using AI, and I kind of like asking a question that's on my mind and not have to try and word it correctly in Google search. I like being able just to speak freely and it knows what I mean. But at the same time, that sentence you just put in is the same amount of water used to make a hamburger. But like it would feed a the butterfly effect eventually makes its way back to cows and water somehow.
Yeah,
Again,
I read
all of the
somewhere
conversations.
that every text query that you put into sort of ChatGPT or
Yeah,
something like that uses the same amount of energy as sort of running a microwave for a couple of seconds or something like that.
it's
And you
some
multiply that over the amount of queries and things. And AI is great. We use AI a lot in our business. It's a really
yes,
handy tool. But we talk about we've just spoken about energy sufficiency. Do we really need to use it to create funny cartoon pictures of people
cartoon
in a
images. Yeah,
Studio Ghibli style or something like that, and infringe on Studio Ghibli's copyright, but also
yeah, yeah.
use all the power for making those cartoons or something, or those generative AI images, when perhaps there should be AI should just be limited to particular applications that kind of make things
Well, I was
make
gonna
our
say
life a bit more efficient and easier, which is great. But
I was gonna say the genie's out of the bottle now, and
the genie is
unfortunately,
out of the bottle.
the world
You
has
can't put it back, right? So
too much. But I'm cognizant of time. So I wanted to sort of close out on, I suppose, some more reflective questions. So if you were, obviously you've only just started your journey, right, at Ecodetect, but if you were to look 10 years ahead, again, I'm going
well, yeah.
crazy with detail here, but 10 years ahead, what does success for Ecodetect look like?
Well, yeah, so it's a big question, right? And we do have a long term vision, but also we're doing a lot sort of in the very short term. Really, I guess generally, I would like us as a society really to kind of push towards more renewable energy, but also a lot more environmental stewardship, and making sure that any large infrastructure project, whether it's a housing estate or building a bridge or some new wind farms, that
Mm,
we deliver that biodiversity net gain. We leave the earth in a more positive state than when we initially sort of broke ground on it. And I think if you look sort of 10 years down the line, and again, geopolitical things may change, but hopefully there's a general trend to move towards more renewable deployments. Um, that there will be a requirement for developers to then monitor and mitigate against any potential sort of negative environmental impacts. And where we're at the moment is we currently have sort of one or two turbine arrays for things like tidal stream and potentially floating offshore wind. But in 10 years' time, these could be hundreds of turbines, maybe even thousands of turbines. And does each one of them need a camera to monitor? Probably not every single one, but what's that number look like? Is it one
yeah.
in 10? Is it one in 20 turbines need to have this monitoring equipment on it? And
I was
generally,
I was
we
gonna
would like to
suggest as
be that
well.
sort of provider of choice for the industry to kind of
Yeah.
deploy cameras and then do all the data analysis and stuff for that. So
Well,
that's our
I
sort
was
of
gonna
long
say,
term ambition.
yeah, I was gonna say as well, like I mean, just off the cuff sort of question is like, what stops you from sticking to marine? Like, why couldn't you be, what's stopping Ecodetect literally being a detector for the ecosystems across the world? So in forests and in grasslands and wetlands and
Yeah,
tracking methane emissions in permafrost and tundra, and there are so many angles I suppose you can come from detecting things and using that to build a model that helps understand a certain thing. I know some of these things already exist in different capacities and stuff, but I guess if the idea here is to protect wildlife, to protect biodiversity, to, as you mentioned, have a biodiversity gain,
yeah.
I suppose again, this is probably beyond your current roadmap remit maybe, but I can definitely see this technology being something that is really important for all biomes and all ecosystems.
Definitely. There are other companies out there that are
Yeah.
already sort of established, looking at
Okay.
birds, the way birds move, onshore wind farms and also above water in offshore wind farms, and there are other companies that use satellite data or animal
Yep, yep, yep.
camera traps and things to detect species onshore. Um, where our USP is really in that marine sector.
Mm, okay.
But you're right, there's nothing really stopping us sort of moving into the terrestrial environment. And again, one of our sort of mini R&D projects that we've got planned in the summer is to maybe put some cameras up in a forest somewhere or by a river, and we've identified a location for that. So potentially we could move into that space, but I wouldn't say it's crowded, but there are other people out
It's
there doing this
semi-saturated.
stuff. So, but I would say that there's probably enough to go round for multiple people to be offering those solutions. Certainly in the marine space, there's very few competitors to what we do. Competition is good and healthy, and it spurs us on. But just the sheer amount of work that's out there, the rate of development of all these marine projects just means that we can't
Yeah.
service that with just sort of one or two companies providing this type of solution. So we do need generally to grow as a company, but also
Yes.
have other companies out there doing similar things. And what I find really interesting actually is perhaps moving away from the oil and gas world that I used to be in, where people that have a block next door, a different oil company, are very sort of secretive and against collaboration. They want to kind of keep all that data and their insights
For
themselves, and they're not
themselves.
going to
Yeah.
share it with their next door neighbor, even though perhaps by combining forces they might have even greater insights of what's going on under the surface. I find
Yes.
that there's sort of a common goal for people in this sort of renewable energy development, but also environmental monitoring space. Everybody wants to deliver more renewable energy, reduce the impacts of climate change, and have a positive impact, and ensure that there's no negative environmental effects. So I find that everybody's a lot more sort of open, more willing to share, more willing to collaborate, even
Yeah.
between competitors, which is something that I wasn't necessarily
Refreshing.
used to,
Yeah.
from the oil and gas industry. So I find that really refreshing.
So I guess a final question is, for any listeners who are working or want to work at that intersection, obviously you're I would say you're quite you're like at a triple junction. You've got a bit of, obviously, well, you got your marine bio, you got your tech, and so I guess AI and environmental stuff comes into that. Where would somebody who wants to work in that intersection between tech, energy, and the environment, where do you think they should start? Is it right at the university level, or or I guess you're an example where you changed midway through your career, right? So, but where do you think they should start if they wanted to sort of work in that?
Yeah, I think um, enthusiasm for what you want to do, enthusiasm in that particular bit of tech that you want to develop, and also technical capability is good. But I don't think there's any one real route to get to that stage now. And I do a lot of sort of careers fairs and things at different schools locally, and also at universities, and I say to people, I've gone that academic route, but actually that those qualifications that I've got from academia aren't necessarily directly relevant to what I do now. There is
Yeah.
some crossover and transferable skills, but for me, I've learned a lot of how to do coding and things from YouTube, and from using AI, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I think the last year's sort of word of the dictionary was sort of vibe coding and things like
Hmm.
that. You know, I think as long as people have that willingness to learn and that sort of technical capability, it doesn't really matter how you attained that, as long
Sure.
as as long as you can kind of deliver on what you say you can. Me personally, as an employer, I don't really care what qualifications you have, as long as you can show me you can do the job well and you have enthusiasm. I'd encourage you to kind of get in contact, and yeah, let's see what you got.
Perfect. Well, that's been a really fun, engaging conversation. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone who decides to watch or listen to this also takes something away from it, because I think you've been on a really, I suppose, interesting journey. back from when I knew you, from when we used to work together. I didn't know this was the direction you were going, but hey ho, this is the
Neither did
direction you
I.
went.
So,
This is the direction you went. But it's really,
so,
really, really cool to see somebody almost do a flip on their life and for the better, do something that they're enthusiastic about, they're driven, and you know what, let's just go straight into the deep end. And that's usually how success stories are made. I mean, some people get handouts in life, which is, it is what it is. But
mhm.
others, go fighting for it, go looking for it, and you seem to have done that. And I wish you all the success. And I just want to appreciate the time. And
Yeah,
I will let
thanks,
you
bud.
get on with your
Yeah, and all
busy
the best with your
schedule.
business ventures as well, and good luck with the podcast. It's been great to chat to you. So yeah, thank you for allowing me the time to talk to you today.
No, brilliant. Thanks, David.
Great, Sard. Yep, I'll speak to you soon.